Okay, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Professor Jin Gao, who will give our opening remarks. Thank you, Jen. And
hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our panel discussion today on the very important topic of the intersection of politics and social work. This is such a timely topic, and I think we are the right people to talk about this topic. My name is Qin Gao. I'm a professor here. I hold the Maurice Russell Professor of Social Policy and Social Work Practice endowed chair position. I'm also the Associate Dean for Doctoral Education at this great school. Welcome, everyone. I know we have a brilliant panel here today, which we will get to. But this gathering reminds me of my first arrival in New York City 25 years ago. I came to pursue my PhD at Columbia School of Social Work. It turned out I was the first ever PhD student from mainland China to study in this school, which had already over 100 years of history. Shortly after I arrived, maybe 2 months in, it was November, election day, I got so excited because having come from China, I never had the opportunity to cast a vote. So I begged my colleagues and lab mates to say, can I follow you to see how you guys actually vote, to shape policy, to impact politics? I couldn't go because they said you have to be a minor to be able to tag along. So I didn't get to go, but now when I go to vote, I take my children so that they feel the power of participating in politics. It was in that old social work building, McVicar Hall. Many of you may remember I met my great friend and colleague, Dr. Charles Lewis, who will later moderate the panel today. So we are social workers. We are powerful. We are change makers, we are trailblazers, and we are advocates. Today, we have this great opportunity to honor someone whose impact within and beyond government really left a legacy for our field and much larger in the society. So the late Sheila Oliver was the first woman of color to serve in a statewide elected office in New Jersey. She was also a great alum from our school in 1976. In her leadership, Lieutenant Governor Oliver upheld the values of social work. She worked for social justice, workers' rights, women's rights, community engagement, and better education for all. I cannot think of a better way to honor and celebrate Social Work Awareness Month and Women's History Month. Now, please allow me the great honor to introduce her niece, Renee Oliver, who is the president of the Sheila Y. Oliver Foundation, from whom we can learn more about our great alum. Thank you and welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Renee Oliver. I'm the president of the Sheila Y. Oliver Foundation and niece of the late, great New Jersey Lieutenant Governor Sheila Y. Oliver. I'm honored to be in the presence of today's brilliant panelists and thrilled to see so many students and young leaders here, both in person and via Zoom, eager to learn as they forge their own paths. Thank you to all the attendees for joining us as well, and those watching online. The story of Sheila Oliver teaches us how a background in social work can prepare you for a life dedicated to uplifting others. A little background on Sheila Oliver, for those who may not know. She was the first woman of color to serve in a statewide elected office in New Jersey. She was also the first Black woman to serve as Speaker of the New Jersey Assembly, which was only the second in the nation's history to lead a state legislative house. She earned her Master of Social Work from Columbia, and that experience was really transformative for her. This foundation gave her a deep understanding of the systemic challenges and tools that are needed to address them. Throughout her career, she worked tirelessly for the people she served, especially those who are far too often forgotten. She led efforts to expand affordable housing, revitalize communities, and prevent homelessness. She championed legislation that protected workers from wage theft, supported caregivers of elderly or disabled loved ones, and established programs to prevent youth from entering the justice system. She was deeply invested in education, ensuring that all children, regardless of their zip code, had access to quality learning, including financial literacy education in New Jersey's public schools. If Sheila Oliver had a seat at the table, it meant that we all had a seat at the table. She was determined to leave no one behind. Her compassion was innate, but her education gave her the tools to turn that compassion into something meaningful and have real action. Social work is about empathy, advocacy, and empowering communities. And these are all principles that my aunt really believed in and brought to every single role that she held throughout her career in public service. She believed good policy must be rooted in compassion and the realities of people's lived experiences. Columbia provided her with the foundation to see problems not just as isolated issues, but as part of a larger social system. Sheila Oliver was also shaped by her role as the executive director of the Leaguers, which was a social services organization based in Newark, New Jersey. There, she addressed community challenges firsthand, from early childhood education to family support services. That experience reinforced the importance of grassroots engagement and informed her approach to policy throughout her career. So it's really a treat to have all these esteemed panelists here because they are really carrying forward that legacy in their own right by exemplifying how a background in social work can drive meaningful change in public service. Your leadership ensures that the next generation has the tools and opportunities to thrive, building on the foundation laid out by those who came before us. So thank you to each of you. And thank you to you all for being here and for your enthusiasm to learn and engage with us today. Before we begin our conversation, though, I'd like to just take a moment to introduce our moderator, the incomparable Dr. Charles E. Lewis Jr. Dr. Lewis is the director of the Congressional Research Institute for Social Work and Policy, a nonprofit that he founded to ensure social workers have a voice on Capitol Hill. His work has brought hundreds of social work students to the Hill to learn how to advocate for policy that supports vulnerable communities. He has been a tireless champion for mental health, criminal justice reform, and policies rooted in real-world social work experience. A professional social worker himself, Dr. Lewis earned his master's at Clark Atlanta University and his PhD in social policy analysis from Columbia University. He has taught at Columbia, Howard University, and the University of Southern California, and he continues to mentor the next generation of social work leaders in policy and advocacy. We are delighted to have Dr. Lewis guiding today's discussion, bringing his deep expertise and passion for connecting social work and public service. Please join me in welcoming him, and thank you all again.
Thank you, Renee. Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us for this special conversation honoring the life and legacy of Sheila Y. Oliver. It's fitting that it's happening in March, which is Social Work Month and Women's History Month. Today's panel is more than remembering an accomplished public official. It's about reflecting on what Sheila Oliver represented for the profession of social work, for women in leadership, and for those who believe public service should be grounded in the lived experiences of communities. Throughout her career, she demonstrated something that those of us in social work understand deeply. Policy is never abstract. Behind every policy decision are real people, real families, and real communities navigating life's challenges. Social workers see these realities every day. Sheila Oliver carried that perspective with her into the highest levels of state government. What made Sheila Oliver distinctive was not simply the offices she held, but the way she approached them. She understood that leadership is not just occupying a position. It's about expanding opportunity and opening doors for others. In that sense, she did not merely break ceilings for herself, she widened the pathway for those who would follow. Today's panel brings together three accomplished women who represent the growing field of political social work. Each of them has navigated the intersection of professional practice and public leadership. Each has had to translate social work values into political environments that are often complex, contested, and sometimes polarized. Our goal today is to explore a question. What does it mean to bring a social work lens to public leadership? What barriers remain for women who seek to influence policy and governance? And what lessons can emerging social workers draw from leaders like Sheila Oliver as they consider their own paths into public life? We also gather at a moment when the nation's democratic institutions face significant challenges. Public trust in government is uneven, political polarization is high, yet the need for thoughtful, ethical leadership grounded in real-world experience has never been greater. This is precisely where social workers can make a difference. Our panel consists of Ashanti Jones to my left, who is a policy analyst for criminal justice reform. She's a policy analyst at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. She received her MSW from Columbia University in 2018 and her PhD from Walden University in 2024. Since then, she has tirelessly pursued systems-level change by engaging impacted people in advocacy. Ashanti is a professor of community and social justice studies at William Patterson University and a Juris Doctorate candidate at Rutgers University. She is also a member of the Network for Social Management. Let's have a hand for Ashanti. Our next panelist is Mayor Emily Jabbour, who was elected the 40th mayor of the city of Hoboken on December 2nd, 2025. And I'm smiling because I've known Emily for a while, and to watch her do this was amazing. She was previously elected to the Hoboken City Council as a council member at large in November of 2017 and was reelected to a second four-year term on November the 2nd, 2021. Now, I could read this whole bio, but we want to hear from Emily. She graduated from Boston College with a BA in psychology and graduated from Columbia School of Social Work with a Master of Science in Social Work and a policy focus and law minor. She's the proud parent of two daughters who attend schools in Hoboken. I guess that's all I have. I want to help me know. Okay. And she's the wife of lifelong Jersey resident Peter Jabbour, head of the Legal for Americas for Amex. Amex. Okay. Thank you. Let's have a hand for Mayor Jabbour. And our third but not least panelist is Mathylde Frontus. Dr. Mathylde Frontus served as a New York State Assemblywoman for the 46th District from November 2018 to December 2022. During her tenure, she was one of just 4 social workers in the legislature and was proud to serve as the first chair of the Minority Mental Health Subcommittee. She's a longtime social worker with a BSW and MSW from New York University Silver School of Social Work and a PhD from Columbia School of Social Work. Mathylde is the principal and founder of Avant-Garde Consulting and Avant-Garde Behavioral Health Resources. Let's have a hand for Mathylde and our panel. So I thought we would begin our discussion by thinking about Sheila Oliver's career, from community leadership to Speaker of the New Jersey Assembly, and later Lieutenant Governor. So I would like our panelists to tell us what aspect of her leadership most reflects the values of social work.
Hello, everyone. Really happy to be here. I have to say, I just have some goosebumps because we're here talking about an extraordinary public servant, and it's just an honor to be here today to remember her legacy. There are so many things that we could say. The question is, what inspires us about her life and work, I believe. Yes? Well, where do we begin? I mean, just in terms of surface level, she was a brilliant, elegant, poised, charismatic person. But on a deeper level, what resonates with me and what I think shines through in terms of the social work profession is that she was a champion for the voiceless. And she saw her public service as an extension of her social work career. I don't know that everyone realizes that. And, obviously, I'm sure everyone here in preparation for today did a lot of reading and looked up a lot of her videos. And so I agree with her 100%. Public service and politics is just a natural extension of the social work profession. And she began serving many years before she took office. So her political career was on a longer continuum of service. That service began when she founded her first nonprofit, fighting for affordability, for low-income housing. It continued with so many other things, and we know the rest.
I think in terms of like social work values and what Ms. Oliver embodied, it really was the fact that I think when we first started this conversation, we started talking about how social work is really grounded in empathy and compassion. And I think that Ms. Oliver really took that to heart, but not in a way where empathy and compassion can sometimes border on pity. Right. And you kind of have a heart for people, because that's why you go into social work, right? Because you want to help people, you want to help communities. And so while her work and her advocacy did give a voice to the voiceless, it also at the same time also it triggered something in me that made me think, well, these people do have a voice, right? We're just not giving them space to share. And one thing that Miss Oliver's life and legacy did was empower, right? And so it took that compassion and that empathy that we're grounded and we're taught is like so crucial and so core to being a great social worker, and turned that into a tool for empowerment through everything that she did. And I think that was the thing that most inspired me and completely turned what I thought I knew about social work in that space around, that I am not the person who has to carry someone's problems or voice, but I can actually empower and help them advocate for themselves. And I thought that was a really great legacy that she left in New Jersey.
So I had the privilege to meet Lieutenant Governor Oliver for the first time at the CAA Leadership Conference here on campus at Lerner. And she gave the keynote remarks that day. And I hadn't previously realized that she had graduated from the school. I knew she was a social worker and I'd heard of her, but I didn't realize that she was Columbia. And so I went to that event. And the thing that I found most inspiring about her was that she was clearly tough. Like, this was a woman who knew what she believed in. And to survive in politics in New Jersey, by the way, has not been easy, as somebody who's in that sort of mix of things. And so I remember when she came out of sort of the process of being selected as lieutenant governor, and I remember reading about her and thinking, those are some tough rooms to have walked out as kind of being in this role. Like, she really knew how to bring people together, though. And so her toughness was at the same time coupled with her compassion for people. And when she spoke, she would talk about all of the tenets of social work, but she would talk about them not as social work values, but what it meant to be a compassionate civil servant in that type of role. And that she would speak on behalf of the people who weren't in the rooms, because it's something that we always need to be thinking about on a policy basis. You know, the people who are there, who are advocating, oftentimes they're there because they had the means to be there, the connections to be there. So who isn't in the room? And how do these policies impact the people who aren't in the room? And so I was so impressed by both the combination of how tough this woman really was, but her ability to be so compassionate and deeply kind to others, like the way that she just had a warmth about her. And it was very clear how she had this long career because people connected with her. She really understood what it was to show up for people in need as a public servant.
So what makes us different? What is it about social work training that makes us different than the traditional political person?
For me, it starts with listening. There's a lot of people in politics who don't listen. And that sounds really basic, and I know that, but it kind of is that simple. And she built coalitions because she listened and understood and was responsive to the things that she heard. Social workers sit in the middle of a number of different systems that often have conflicting goals. And so how do we navigate that? How do we figure out the commonalities? Where are there places where there are common ground that you can work from? And the fact that she got to all of those different roles in her career, it speaks to the fact that she was successfully able to navigate all of those complex systems in a way that no one else with no other professional background could have possibly accomplished, I feel. Because social workers, I think, are very unique in the way that they are able to take their listening skills and the way that they really hear people and feel that and act from a place of reflecting on that and taking action based on the things that you hear from others. And to pull all together those disparate parties in a political system, it's really challenging thing to do, but she was the right person to do that work.
Dr. Frontus, what makes you different when you go into these arenas?
Well, thank you for asking. No, I've been thinking about this, of course, not just in preparation for today, but it's a question, of course, that people ask me, knowing that I have 3 social work degrees, and I actually teach a political social work course, as I was telling you earlier. There's so much I could say about what makes social workers different when we show up in the room. First of all, just our training. There's a natural synergy between public service and social work, right? Because the mission is to alleviate human suffering. It's to make society a better place. We all have that we're kind of hardwired to leave society better than we found it. But I like to say it gives us a deep foundation in social justice, that training that we receive. And we also get an intellectual framework, as was said earlier. And what do I mean by that? For every social problem in our society, there is a policy explanation. Right? So social workers have a specific hat on that allows us to realize if we're talking about poverty, if we're talking about inequality, if we're talking about human suffering, these aren't abstract concepts. We know and we understand that those are a result of policy choices. So we're already showing up understanding those things. And as was said earlier by Dr. Jones, now we have to figure out what are we going to do about it, right? Because it's not just feeling it inside, but it's the social justice commitment.
Ashanti, you want to weigh in on that?
I love to say the thing that makes me different is my beautiful hair. But I think honestly what it is the fact that while there is a natural synergy between public service and social work, I think that politics in itself is like highly contentious. And as someone who like works with different legislators, like I try to meet with every single legislator in New Jersey to try to get some of my bills and laws passed. And so it's very difficult sometimes to manage some of those those intersections, because a lot of where some of these policies come from, because sometimes I'll just like be surfing this website and I'll see a lot. I'm like, what, a bill? And I'm like, what is this? Where did this come from? Where's the impetus behind it? And it's something that's self-serving. I spoke to a legislator. He told me, well, this happened to my daughter, this one person. And so now we're going to penalize the entire New Jersey because this one-off incident happened to your child. And so the thing that I think that social, not that doesn't matter, but it just does more harm than good, right? And so why social work is different in that regard is because we're able to see those individual instances and think about what is the systemic real issue is, right? And why are we penalizing this action and not understanding the underpinning social issue that has actually drawn that. And so like my work is centered around juvenile justice and, closing youth prisons in New Jersey. People see kids who commit crimes and just like, okay, well, if you have a kid who does something bad, you punish them, right? And so it's like, yeah, but kids are not committing these kinds of crimes for fun or because they want to. There's something else happening. Why are we ignoring the adverse childhood experiences? Why are we ignoring poverty? Why are we ignoring domestic violence? We're ignoring all of the social issues. And I think social work in that sense is different when we show up in those spaces because we're actually able to see those things and articulate them in a way that helps people who are not well versed in trying to understand what happens behind the scenes to actually enforce policy that makes sense and that will actually tangibly change what we're seeing in our cities and states.
So when you go into these settings, these legislative settings, right, you got a lot of empathy for the community and social justice, but the people in there are not necessarily there to talk. So what approach do you have to take? You can't come in saying we should do this because it's fair and just. And so how do you, what kind of approach do you take going into that? Ashanti, go ahead, start with you.
My personal theory of change and why I'm so attracted to the Institute is because their theory of change is from the ground up. I can go in and talk about all of these issues abstractly. I can talk about juvenile justice. I can talk about poverty. I can talk about affordable housing. I can talk about healthcare. But all they're seeing is a person who's an advocate who's smart and read some books. I like to coalition build. I like to empower people who are actually seeing these policies show up on their doorstep to tell their stories. And so the testimony that I bring to a legislative session is not my story. I actually have Tom and Vanessa and their children come and talk to the legislators, right? I obviously help them kind of craft their story. But coalition building is so important because while I can have all of the solutions in my head that I've learned from all my social work training and everything that I've read on like the human rights website and UN, but none of that really matters if none of those solutions are actually targeting the issue. And so I love to talk to people who are actually experiencing the issue that I'm working on and saying, how do you think we fix this issue? What do you think you would need in order to get over this barrier and craft a policy like that? So I don't just walk into the room with legislators with my statistics because they don't see numbers. Our incarceration rate in Jersey is $600,000 to incarcerate a single child for a year. They don't care because we'll do anything for public safety, right? And so why does that matter more than actually seeing the 14-year-old who lost 10 years of their life and then, oh, wow, they were actually falsely incarcerated, or, oh, wow, they actually had a coercive interrogation, right? And so those are the stories and those are the experience and those are the people that legislators need to see. And that's kind of like what I like to do.
So Mayor, I'm sorry. You've been in this, the city council as well.
Mhm.
So, I mean, how do you move policy forward? Because you're not going to convince everybody that social justice is the way to go.
So sometimes for me, it's about redefining the problem. And so sometimes you have to step back because sometimes people are really quick to say that they have the solution. Oh, I have, I want to just get something done, so I'm just going to put this out there, but it wasn't actually well informed by what it was trying to solve for. And so what I found to be successful is often stepping back and taking the time to sit down with multiple stakeholders and say, you know, what do you see as the concern here? Like, what are we really actually trying to solve for? Because sometimes people have jumped at a conclusion without actually taking the time to build up what is the argument that led to that. And I find that it's really useful exercise to think about how I define the problem in like a 30-second social media clip. There's been a lot about thinking about how people consume news right now through social media that challenges me to define a problem quickly and in plain English. And that actually makes it a much more accessible conversation than for people who wouldn't have otherwise felt like they had an opinion or could weigh in on something that they might have thought was too complex for their opinion to be weighed in. And so sometimes for me, it's about like stepping back out of that process and saying, well, let's figure out what are the data points? You know, what is the cost of this, or, you know, who's involved in that? And are we talking to everyone who's impacted by this? And sometimes by stepping back out of that, you can actually get to a much better endpoint. And you might land in a completely different place. But if you're really trying to solve for that key concept that you can pull everybody back and center around that, you can potentially get to that outcome. Not always, but you can.
Yeah, I don't know that there's a perfect way to do it, but I have to say, I have never shied away from what I would call a moral framing. You know, if you look at what's happening today, we can't pussyfoot and be shy to say, no, I'm standing on this. This is what I believe in. I'm doing this because I believe that this is the right way. And yes, you might sound like children arguing, you know, I'm right. No, I'm right. But to me, you know, I think of all the fights that I've had during my political career going up against the city. Sometimes I was the only elected official at times in my community who was standing with the people. Until this day, if I'm walking down the street, people still walk up to me and they're thanking me, because even if it means standing alone, you know what you believed in, right? So I'm thinking of a particular fight in my mind when the city wanted to do a project, but most of us in the community felt that the cost was too high. It would come at some environmental cost for us, you know, that it would be hazardous to the community. And they really wanted to do it and they were really pushing it. And we were like, this is not a good idea. And at the very end, they ended up agreeing with us, but it wasn't fun to stand alone. And it's just something we have to give ourselves the discipline to do and say, no, this is what I believe in and this is why I'm doing it.
So you've been successful in this arena, but are there still structural barriers that makes it difficult for women, and particularly women of color? Yeah.
Yes.
Did you elucidate on what structural barriers because you know, some folks will tell you that it's an even it's a level playing field. You know, that sexism is not a big a problem as it used to be.
It's still a problem because to the extent that humans are in charge of things, to the extent that you know, humans are the ones calling the shots, we continue to be flawed. You know, we continue to suffer from all of the isms, as I like to say, colorism, sexism, and classism, and all of those things. And yeah, it's very difficult. I'm sure everyone here has a story, but especially I would say for Black women in particular, you know, there's a pernicious problem with just showing up in a room and people making stereotypes, people making assumptions about you. And you constantly feel like you're fighting to assert your dignity. Don't put me in a box. Don't think that you know what I'm going to say or that you know what I believe. But if you look at the lieutenant governor, you look at some of us who are here in this, it's one of those things, the show must go on, right? So you know that you have all of these you know, all of these things stacked against you, but you still have to lead and do what it is that you have to do.
Right. So if Sheila Oliver was with us today, what would she say to the young people in this room and watching us virtually about what it would take for them to go into public life?
Not that I claim to have any personal knowledge of what Miss Oliver would really say, But I think she say it's not as far as a leap as you think, right? Again, politics, I guess, when you see it on the media and you kind of like think about like how politics is portrayed, is usually like this underground, kind of like backhanded, really dirty playing field. And in some cases, it really can be. It's not as bad as like Succession or anything like that, but it is pretty. It's a place where we're actually able to do good work, right? And if you are a social worker who's truly committed to advancing humanity and eliminating a lot of the isms and kind of moving us forward, then going into politics is an easy way to do that, because policies literally shape lives. They're literally the things that dictate someone's day to day. A policy will be the difference between someone being able to put food on their table or not. And those are the things that I think matter, and which is the reason why I decided to go macro anyway with social work, because I felt like not that there's anything wrong with being clinical. I love that, and I did that, but I realized that I would burn out so quickly if I tried to tackle these individual, I think I called it triaging when I was talking to Mr. Jones earlier, and you would burn out. And so I felt like going macro and kind of looking at the systemic issues and trying to figure out like how do we build these solutions. One, it's highly fulfilling. And two, it's second nature to what social work was intended to do. And I feel like that's really what it was and it's intended to do. And so I think Ms. Oliver would tell people not to limit themselves and to think beyond whatever limitations people set for you, because Ms. Oliver was, for lack of a better word, a badass. She was like the first in New Jersey, and it was a pleasure. She even signed legislation that I wrote, and so like to me it was like social worker to social worker. It was like a fist pound, like we did something great here for New Jersey, right? And so I think that's what she would say.
Okay. Based on what you know about Sheila Oliver, what would she say to young people who are thinking about going into politics? I mean, many young people, they think, why bother?
I think she would say, because your voice matters. Because I think she was so clear that it wasn't just about her individually, that this was always about everyone else. I have like a little quote that somebody gave me that's like on a little canvas that's, a strong woman stands up for herself. The stronger woman stands up for everyone else. And I think of her in that quote because her experiences could have been diminished. And I contextualize that. Like I remember when President Obama was running for president and they would refer to him, oh, he's just a community organizer. And I think about that because there were people who will say, oh, just a social worker, as if that's something that's beneath a lawyer or, any other profession that gets into politics. There's just this sense, I think I always bump up against and find that the stereotype of social work professionals is that you're a child welfare worker who separates children. Like that's what people always seem to think. I think that's their stereotype when you think of that profession, and it works against us when it comes to trying to get into all of the other places where we belong, because our experiences are just as credible and in fact probably better suit us for being in elected office than most others. But our voice matters, and we have incredible knowledge by virtue of our lived experiences as social workers or as people who come from communities that are underrepresented or any number of different categories that aren't in the rooms where policy is being made and debated. So I think, she would remind all of us that each of our voices matters in those halls and in those spaces, and that's why we have to show up.
I'll only add to that because it's all been said. Obviously, I don't know exactly what the lieutenant governor would say, but I believe from what I know of her that she would say, get up and get involved. Because life is not a spectator sport. And certainly if she was here today in 2026, looking at what is going on in the world, I think she would say, get up now and do something today because our democracy is at stake and everyone has a role to play. You know, one of the things I'll say as a longtime community organizer of over 20 years is I never cease to be amazed at how many people in our communities think that nobody cares what they think and there's nothing that I can do. What can I really do? You know, everyone likes to talk a good game, but what can I do? I'm drowning in my own issues. I have my own problems here. I'm struggling to make ends meet. And so I know in social work, we talk and we use a lot of flowery terms and we say everyone has to get involved and everyone has to do something, but that doesn't always land. That's not everybody's reality. And so I do think that that work is a day-to-day thing of really just modeling that behavior and letting people know, what can you do today? What does that look like? Getting involved. It's not just something to put on a t-shirt, but what does it really mean to get involved? Because that's what her life demonstrated. From the time she was a young person, she got involved. She figured it out. And I think she would say, if she were here today to a room full of people, you have to figure it out yourself as well. What are you going to do?
Because so there are so many issues and problems that we need to solve. Okay. But for you, for each of you, if there was, you have to start with one. Okay. Where would you start? What would be the one issue you would want to tackle first and why?
Of the millions?
Pick what? Housing,
For me,
education.
No, for me, I mean, this is a given incarceration. I think like New Jersey is just, we have the most racially disparate juvenile justice system and adult system in the country. And so like for me, that speaks volumes. And it's incredibly disheartening, especially as a mom of a Black boy and soon to be Black, I don't know, whatever this is I'm having. But it's disheartening to grow up in a city, in a state that you love, that you grew up in, and realize that the majority of our carceral state encompasses people who look like you. And I think like, so for me, incarceration, I'm an abolitionist at heart and a moderate anarchist. So I do believe that we need to dismantle our carceral structure as it exists. I think that's, if I could fix that issue tomorrow, I would.
So I'll pick housing to start because I think that's certainly a challenge. The city of Hoboken is 1 square mile with 60,000 people in it. And something that I often hear, the stories that people talk to me about are, you know, it's across the lifespan. It's your seniors who want to stay in the community because they don't want to be displaced and there's not enough senior housing. It's the young couples who want to stay because their children are in our pre-K program and they really want to be invested in our school district, but there are no options for a growing family in the footprint that exists in our town. Or it's the people who grew up there and have been there for generations and there's no additional stock in terms of affordable units. I just think housing is at the foundation of so many of the services that people need and really how your ability to show up and be resilient, you know, when you're worried and you have anxiety about how you're going to cover your rent or any number of other aspects of your housing situation, the condition of your home, the health of your home, it's hard to be able to focus on tackling anything else in your life that's a challenge. So for me, it's I think a lot about affordable housing options in a community like mine.
It's hard to pick one thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we say that all politics is local, which is true. And for many of us who are activists, who are organizers, we care about those grassroots issues right outside our door, happening right in our neighborhood. But we also care about what's happening on the national stage. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that that's just as urgent and just as important. There's nothing for us to fix if we don't have a society, if we don't have a democracy, right? But to add to the list, I will say that in my local work, in my day-to-day activism, I care very, very much about promoting economic mobility. for Black and Latino families. It's something I've been doing for years. When I was a sitting assemblywoman, I introduced, and I'm sorry for turning, for those of you sitting here, I had put together this plan called the 6-point economic mobility plan. It was a plan to help local families close the wealth gap. We curated a program and helped families with home ownership, entrepreneurship, small business, attainment, cooperative economics, financial literacy, et cetera. And now that I'm out of office, I'm doing that exact same work through a nonprofit that I help co-start in the community. And it's incredible work. I always say, you know, we're not going to get fanfare. We're not going to be on the cover of the New York Times, or you won't see us on CNN. But in Black and brown communities all across the city, people are doing that work, that heavy lifting work, and trying to make change. And I'm really committed to that because the wealth gap between Black and white families is abysmal.
So, what do you think? How can social work move the needle, maybe in the next 10 years? And audience, I should acknowledge that our panelists didn't get these questions prior to me, but I'm sitting here looking at them, and they got a list of questions in front of them, and I'm not asking these questions. So I might have to need some help getting out of here when I leave. But it also shows you that they can think extemporaneously, and they've been doing a wonderful job in terms of addressing some of the issues that I've been raising. So how can social work as a profession have influence on policy going forward? You know, yeah.
I can say something very short because I feel so passionate about this. I've been shouting it from the rooftops everywhere I go. And by the way, I love my alma mater, so everything I say is in love. I'm a graduate of NYU Silver. I'm a graduate here of Columbia School of Social Work. We have to make sure our social work students are getting exposed to all types of social work. I just feel so strongly about it to the point of shouting it. It's fine to do clinical social work. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I have lots of clinical training. I've done that work. I'm a psychotherapist. I've done it all, behavioral health provider. But the world has changed. I tell my students now that we're in a post-Black Lives Matter world, right? We're in a post-Black Lives Matter world. So what that means is we don't have the luxury to say, oh, I don't know anything about that. I didn't take that up. I never took a class in that. That's just a luxury we don't have. And so when you talk about the future of social work, the future of social work is that we must all be conversant in politics, advocacy, policy, at least at a minimum conversant. Doesn't mean that your degree is in it, but everyone needs to have a political social work class. Everyone needs to have a little practice with macro so that they can have the tools in their toolkit for what's happening in the world.
I would love to underscore all of that. I mentioned before kind of the stereotype around social work, and I think we as a profession don't do enough to educate people about what social workers can do and where we show up. It's something I tell students often is when you're looking for job opportunities, don't look for the ones that just say MSW, because that's not the job for you necessarily. And especially in an advocacy space, in a macro space, in a policy space, they don't know that they want you. They don't know that they need you in their organization. And so marketing yourself is really a really important aspect of being a student and what you do in terms of your positioning yourself and advocating about how you show up as a candidate. And similarly, I think when it comes to thinking about yourself then in the next step in a political environment, coming from whatever your experiences may be professionally and then maybe going in that direction, you know, politics is just advocacy. And I'm not sure why we think of politics as something that is other or outside of us. And I had that feeling. I was in the car on the way here with Bianca, who is our City of Hoboken social worker and a Columbia grad as well. And we were talking about imposter syndrome because especially for women, you think that you are not qualified enough because you have not done enough of the things. You haven't been in your career long enough. There's any number of excuses that you can find that will say why I am not yet ready to do the thing. But in fact, none of the people who got into politics before you were qualified necessarily to do the thing at 100% success rate. And people get in there, and by the way, they fail, and that's fine. It's not always the right fit, and sometimes you move on to something else. But I remember when I first was being asked to consider running for city council in 2017, and it was year after the first term of President Trump was elected in 16. And I remember thinking to myself, why am I questioning if I can run for city council when this man is our president? I just don't understand why I'm so hard on myself. And when you think about it like that, you go, oh, well, of course I should run for city council, or of course I should stick my neck out and run for mayor, because you have to. I mean, but we have to believe that. And it's something, you know, as the mother of 2 daughters, I love that all of their friends look at me and go, oh, your mom's the mayor. Yes, and you can be a mayor, and you can be a mayor, and you can be a senator, and you can be a congressperson. Like, but if we don't actually say those things out loud and lean into them and tell other people to also think that way, well, then you end up with political systems that don't actually reflect any of us. And that's where things go off the rails, unfortunately.
I feel like I could be mayor now. Thank you.
Man, do it.
So you said so many things that registered for me. Like, one, yes, don't go for the job that says MSW. I'm the only social worker at the Institute, and that job posting did not say MSW. And, you know, I had to create a space for myself, even when, because even my job titles in my job, my work now is different than it was when I first got in there. So yes, go for the job that doesn't necessarily seem like it's what you were trained for, because that may be the place where you make the most difference. Second piece was about imposter syndrome. And I want to be frank that when I first stepped into Columbia University as a social work student was the first time in my life I ever felt imposter syndrome. And I've been in a lot of educational spaces. And so in terms of the question about like what social work can do, I think the first thing that we need to do is speak truth to power and call out the colonization in social work. And we have to decolonize it. And the reason why I say that is because it wasn't until I got into my PhD program that I even learned about the Sustainable Development Goals and like how human rights and all of these things on the international stage, how they reflected here in America, and how behind the ball we are, and like how big our social work is. And the second thing that I learned, and kind of understanding, because I grew up in foster care in New Jersey, and I also am very passionate about incarceration and mass incarceration, and then also finding out that social workers were responsible for the first juvenile court in this country. I didn't learn that when I was becoming a social worker. I didn't know that social work itself was predominantly white. Didn't know that. I didn't know the ways in which social work introduced so many of the systems that we have today, and then kind of like shied away when it went wrong. And I think we have to come to grips with the fact that we have to fix all of those things. We can't just call for reparations on a national stage and not talk about it within disciplines, because social work is so important, right? And at one point, people like me couldn't even access social work services. And when we did, we became, I'm not gonna go into all of it. But regardless, I think that we have to just be honest about like what social work's legacy has been, and how we can create a future wherein we actually fix the issues we've caused. And I say that as a social worker, and I'm a proud social worker, and I recognize the ways in which my life and work and all the people that I will inspire behind me have to remedy those issues. And so those are the things that I think we can do to kind of move social work forward in order to get us past the next stage.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if someone in the audience, I don't have a name, wants to know how valuable is your PhD in the work that you're doing, and is it necessary?
How valuable is it? You know, I have a lot of inside jokes going on in my head as well, you know, because I have a lot of PhD friends and we crack jokes all the time about our PhDs. But I'll be honest, you know, it's valuable to me. It gives me a sense of independence. It does, you know, tell the world that you're an expert in your subject matter. And I find that it allows me to move in and out of a lot of different rooms because of the training that I have. So I have my own consulting firm. I love doing consulting work. I love helping people solve their problems. I love working with organizations, nonprofit, It's something that just brings me immense joy, and it's very challenging. And I teach here. I teach at NYU, so it's been a good ROI for me. For me, depends on who you ask.
It does, because now I'm going to tell you something different. No, okay, not really. I did really enjoy the challenge of the PhD. And again, like I said, it wasn't until I got into my PhD program that I could really position myself as an expert in my field and really know that I've done as much work as I can do to know as much as I want to know and need to know about the work that I want to do. And so in that sense, I do love it. However, like I did my dissertation during law school orientation because I just was like, there's more. And so I'm not sure. So, because I already had like my job and everything, and was doing all the things that I was already doing before my PhD. And so I like even teaching, like, I probably can't get a tenure track job. So like, if you want to, be a tenure track professor, you probably should pursue the PhD. But for me, I just love education. And so like, I'm going to say, go as far as you can go if you want to like just get to the end of your field. But I wouldn't say that was necessarily necessary. And I think that's it's just personal because I know that my intersection is really like legal as well. And so like, there was always going to be more for me. This is my last degree though. I'm not, no more school. But yeah, this is going to be the end of the road for me, but it really depends on what you want to do. I do value it because again, it does allow you access to spaces, and there's a level of credibility that comes with your research, your publications, and things like that. And so, if those are things that interest you, I would say definitely pursue it.
One more question here: how viable do you think it would be for a political party grounded in social work values and ethics to emerge in today's political system, and what might such a party look like?
Ooh, whoever asked that question, I have to be honest, I tell people this all the time. We all have our own calling in life. And sometimes the person who's asking the question is the person who's meant to take that first step. We desperately need a new party. I can't emphasize that enough. It's something I think about all the time. What would we call it? I don't know. Don't want to get too political, but we are in need of it because we're not, I think, in my humble estimation, a lot of people are feeling left out of what currently exists. If you are someone who is classically anti-war, if you are someone who just have things that are deal breakers for you, you're always going to be on the outside looking in because there's nothing there for you.
Anybody else?
I mean, in theory, I would love that. It's very, I mean, I would love that. I think it's less for me about a political party per se. Like, I just want there to exist more of a space where like your NASWs or even for schools of social work really like took the leap all the way into talking about politics and social work, because I don't think we do that enough. And part of the reason I came to Columbia was for the policy program specifically, because I already knew by the time I was in college, I kept working with organizations that were hitting the same wall over and over and over again. And I remember thinking as a college student, like, what is happening in our systems that they are not actually reflective of the process that people are going through? I had been working with a domestic violence program, and there were just certain constraints, and we just would see it with clients over and over again. And so a psychology professor was the one who sat down and said to me, "You sound like somebody who should go to social work school." And I said, "I don't know anything about social work school. I, was studying psychology. I was working in a laboratory, like doing social psychology research. But no one had talked about social work. There's just not enough education about the profession, where it fits, and it's certainly the politics. And in this moment, especially when I think people are feeling completely either, apathetic and they don't think that their voice matters anymore, or they just don't feel like people represent them. That's where like social work should be like leaning all the way out there to talk to people about their need to come to the table and be willing to raise their hand and be that person. So it's for me less about like a party. It's more about, I think, the education and talking about what social work is as a profession and how it shows up in a with a political lens.
Okay, I'm going to make this final question from the audience, and then I'm going to give each of our panelists an opportunity to make a closing statement. As an LMSW with majority direct service experience, how does one step in macro roles? Also, what type of systems or roles would be a good stepping stone? Dr. Jones, we start with you.
Can I see that as I answer the question, please? Thank you. It was a two-parter. You just do, right? Like as an LMSW with majority direct service experience, how does one step into macro roles? You just do. If you're in your direct service work and you're seeing patterns and things that you see keep repeating yourself that tug at your conscience or really are really bothering you, I'm sure there's some organization or some entity that does that work. And if it doesn't exist, create it. I don't think that there's a stepping stone. I think it's really just about your passion. I mean, while social workers, and I think this is what Sheila Oliver was so incredible at, is that like she was never in any lane, you know, like she definitely had the things that she was passionate about individually, but like she worked in every sphere to create access and pathways for people. So it's really about whatever is on your heart as a stepping stone. If you see an organization or something or a gap in your community, even build that system or move. You don't actually have to wait for an opportunity to present itself. You can create one. And I think that's my answer.
Yeah, I would say I definitely have had the experience over the years of speaking with friends. I have never been in clinical social work, but I know for friends that have reached out to me to say, you know, we know that you're in the policy program, like I'm being asked to become a supervisor or I'm being asked to take on a leadership role. Like, what do you think I should do? I think those are great opportunities. On the one hand, it reflects that you are growing and advancing in your career. But I would say to also make sure that you identify what you need to be successful in that space, because sometimes people get pulled into those roles because it's the necessity of the organization, but it isn't necessarily what you've been prepared for. So you have to also make sure that you're looking out for what are my needs educationally or in sort of, you know, additional coursework that will get me to the place where I truly feel like I have all the tools I need to be successful in that space. And to learn from others. I'm a big fan of when I find smart people and I connect with them, I don't care what their background is. I want to sit down and like have a cup of coffee and pick their brains. And the thing I have found is that if you ask anyone, hey, do you have 20 minutes just to sit down and tell me about your life and your career? Everyone says yes, because everyone wants to tell you what they've been through and what they've experienced and what they've learned from it. Like it's your natural instinct. And it's frankly part of why we all become social workers, I think, is because we all love connecting with people. And so I think if you have those opportunities, you have to also identify and find people who can be mentors for you or who can help you get the experience and the education that you need to move into those new roles. But I very much appreciate it. I think from the top we were talking about, Sheila Oliver's legacy is that she didn't just go into those spaces and break those ceilings. She widened the path for other people because she inspired and brought in others to follow her. And frankly, I feel like I get to say that I'm part of that because I looked to her as a social worker in politics in New Jersey and said, she's doing this, like I can do this too. And so thinking about mentorship in all those ways, because she absolutely was for so many.
Yeah, just to add to what's been said, in social work, we have micro, meso, and macro, right? We operate on those three levels. So to repeat what was said earlier, you don't really you technically don't need an invitation. If you're a clinical social worker, whatever that looks like for you, whatever work you're doing now, and you want to know how to get involved, we live in a time of social media now. If I were you, I would start getting involved in community work. That's happening right outside your door. People are organizing every single day, 7 days a week. There are groups of people that are meeting to talk about what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about that? That looks like joining a nonprofit organization, a board of directors, a tenant advocacy group. That could mean joining a political club. All of that activity with no hyperbole is happening outside your doors. Whatever you care about, whatever you're passionate about, you can look up where can I find other like-minded people? Where are they gathering? What are they up to? And you can start getting involved right away, right? And you start to feel that level of excitement and it takes you out of that routine of just doing that one thing.
So if we were to gather here 10 years from now, what would success look like for political social work? What could we, 10 years from now, if we were here and we were talking about being that we've been successful, you know, what would that look like, and what part of Sheila Oliver's example would lead us there?
I don't think there's one way to look at success, but at a minimum, just low-hanging fruit, more social workers in public office. That's something we can measure. We can count on our hands. How many social workers are in my city council? How many social workers are in my state house, right? The state legislative body. How many social workers are serving in Congress? So we want to see social workers running for office, winning seats, assuming leadership roles, in the spirit of the lieutenant governor. As was said, she created her own lane. Social workers deserve a seat at every table as thought leaders, writing op-eds, and it should just be normalized that we're in the room where decisions are being made.
I think in 10 years, we'll stop seeing first because we've officially gotten rid of our two-party system and have addressed all of the isms, right, in an ideal world, and have just created access to space for people. But I think that Dr. Frontus was pretty spot on. And even if you're like shy and I don't want to talk in front of, you can be in those legislative offices, right, reading legislation that legislators are writing and like making comments like, this is not going to do what you think it's going to do, right? And we actually need to be thinking about things this way. So there are always ways to get involved in politics without necessarily being the representative. And so I want folks to just, I think in 10 years, we'll have expanded our thinking around what social work is and created different pathways for create a new type of social work, right? Or even just realizing that social work is more than just the 6, or I don't even how many paths do they have here now? Is it 6, 4? Oh, it used to. Oh wow, okay, yeah. So beyond the 4 tracks that we're taught that there are, and so I'd love to see that.
I agree with you.
So Mary, you get the last word.
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly that I want to just see the numbers in social work and elected office go way up. And I have this very visceral memory of being upstairs in a policy class, and we were having a conversation about a book by George Lakoff. It's not about an elephant. And it was all about semantics and political debates and why it was, I think we were talking about abortion as a topic and why one party debated it one way and why the other party debated it the other way, and how that informed kind of the national temperature around it. And I remember thinking in that class, that was the first time I Googled how many MSWs are there in Congress, and there was one. And it was Mr. Towns. And I later had the opportunity just last year to meet Mr. Towns. And I didn't know until last year that he had succeeded Shirley Chisholm. It was the same seat. And I all of that connected in my brain. And I was just that's incredible. Those are people. I mean, Shirley was a social worker, basically. Her quote is, you don't have a seat at the table, you bring the folding chair. I mean, I just remember that is just ingrained in my mind, incredible women who have just led the way. Talk about it. But yeah, I remember just thinking that like planted a little seed in my brain. So like fast forward to, over 10 years later, I'm sitting at a table with the mayor of Hoboken, Dawn Zimmer. She was the first woman. I'm the second. And she was the one who said, I really want you to run for city council. And I said, you're out of your mind. Why would I do that? And she really kind of had to tell me like why she saw something in me. And I will be forever grateful because I didn't see that for myself necessarily, but little pieces start kind of pulling together in your mind, and all of a sudden you find yourself, raising your hand. And for me, success is bringing more people into these spaces and giving them the confidence that even if you don't want to be the elected official, if you're the legislative aide, if you're any number of, staffers around it, like your voice matters in those rooms and you're forming and shaping better policy because of it.
Thank you. As we conclude today's discussion, it's worth returning to the broader theme that brings us together. Sheila Oliver's career reminds us that democracy is not sustained solely by elections or institutions. It's sustained by people who are willing to step forward and translate their professional values into public leadership. As social workers, we spend our careers helping people navigate systems, health, housing, education, and justice. But those systems do not exist in isolation. They are shaped by public policy. They encourage social workers to move beyond the role of observer to that of participant in the democratic process. We bring communities to the legislative table. I kind of adopted that from her philosophy. And so that's one of the phrases I'm going to be using in our events come March. We bring communities to the table, because if you're not at the table, you just might be on the menu. Yeah. Sheila Oliver embodied that connection between practice and policy. She understood that governance must remain grounded in the experiences of the people it serves. If her legacy teaches us anything, it is that social workers should never underestimate our potential to shape policy and public life. Our knowledge, values, and practical experience can strengthen policy making and improve outcomes for community. The question for the next generation is not whether social workers belong in public leadership. Leaders like Sheila Oliver have already answered that. The real question is, how many will follow? Thank you all.